now because we're going to get started on this important reception. You're not going to hear very much from me. I'm going to introduce all our speakers, and then at some juncture Mark Fairhurst, our national chairman, is going to speak. I've sort of told all the speakers not to speak for too long because we've got lots of excellent speakers, but I've told Mark, because he's the POA chair, he can speak for as long as he wants.
Today's an historic day. The government's Employment Rights Bill is having its second reading. This will be the biggest upgrade of workers and trade union rights in a generation. New rights for millions of workers. The first time a government has rolled back anti-union legislation in decades. The Trade Union Act 2016 will go, and the Strikes Act, which we campaigned so hard against last year, the Minimum Services Levels Act, effectively an attack on the right to strike, will be repealed before it has ever been used. An historic day indeed, but it's one I think which highlights the absolute injustice of denying prison officers their right to strike. And my message to MPs, to ministers and peers is simple. The right to strike is a fundamental human right, and it should apply to all workers, including prison officers.
We hope, and I don't know if he's here, can't see from here, but whether the new Minister Timpson, will be coming in, will be dropping by. We know that he understands the need to get the right staff in our prisons, and that we need to get them to stay after they've been trained, after they've learned their craft. We need to get the right staff, we need to get them to stay. And we'll be working with him with his review of prison officer training, which is an issue, of course, that the POA has raised time and time again. And we need to keep, of course, to be able to keep our brightest and our best prison officers. We need to be able to pay them, treat them properly, which is, of course, why in the Justice Unions group we support your campaign for a return to collective bargaining with full industrial rights, the right to strike, and, of course, that 68 is too late to wait for a pension. It should be 60 years after 30 years service, as of course with the police.
People pigeonhole us by what we do. People pigeonhole us in the sectors in which we work in. But we are so much more than that. We are a movement. And therefore there is no place for anybody outside the ILO. There's no place for anybody outside of the Employment Rights Bill tonight that shouldn't have the right to strike, that shouldn't have the right to protect itself, that shouldn't have the right to stand with each other, and shouldn't have a voice everywhere. So I fully support the POA in what they seek to do. And I do remember a couple of years back, Steve Gillen standing up in the TUC and saying, who's going to turn the key on me? Well, no one's going to turn the key in the POA while we fight as a movement. We undo this injustice and give everybody the right to strike that they should have. Thank you for listening.
And I think it's worth drawing a few parallels. During the pandemic, our members who delivered education in prison balloted and nearly, but didn't have to take industrial action in order to keep our members safe. A right denied to the POA. Our members recently have taken industrial action in prison in order to get better wages, and they have. Some of our members won over a 10% pay increase. A right denied to the POA. Over the last 2 years, significant amounts of unions, just as we have heard from Mick, have taken action either defensive themselves, to better conditions, or to protect our movement. A right denied to the POA for 30 years now. And regardless of that, there has been no stronger champion of our union and every other union fighting to do the things that they have been denied to do than the POA. And what we've seen during that time, all right, coupled with austerity as well, is a degradation of pay, conditions, people leaving the sector, and increased violence in prisons. And those things go hand in hand. Because when you have a strong unionised workforce who is able to take action if necessary to protect themselves, you have a safer working environment. So wherever you stand, whatever sector, it is in everybody's interest, whether you educate in prisons, you're a prison officer, or happen to be in one yourself, to support a properly legislated and regulated POA. And you will always have our support. Thank you.
But tonight is a privilege to be asked to speak at this on behalf of PCS, another union that has members in the justice sector, members who work in the courts, members who know exactly what is going on right now in the justice sector and what the devastating swathing cuts have had over that period of time. And our members, believe it or not, like some others, like Joe Grady said before, you sometimes get unexpected links, don't you? Well, for many of you who won't realise that many of our members work coaches and job centres also have to attend prisons. For those prisoners who are about to be released, to talk them through the benefit system, or lack of it, and what they're expected or what they can expect when they are released from prison. So we are absolutely 100% behind the calls and the demands of the POA for restoration of their right to strike, a right taken away 30 years ago today. But I would also remind comrades that this is a battle that will always continue until those rights are restored. Because we are, in our union PCS, we're also celebrating an anniversary this year. It's 40 years since the then Thatcher government banned the right to be a member of a trade union to our members who worked in GCHQ in Cheltenham. And many good comrades here today attended a march through Cheltenham in January to commemorate that occasion. But we were fortunate. The last Labour government did actually do what it promised to do when it was elected, and it restored those trade union rights to those members. It reinstated the sacked workers who lost their jobs as a result of having the temerity to demand that their right to be part of a trade union. Well, now this Labour government needs to do the right thing by POA, restore its natural justice, its human rights, and the dignity that every worker has and should have. Because we do not, despite what some people try and make out, we do not take strike action lightly. Quite frankly, many of our members can't afford to take strike action too lightly. What we do is we use strike action as a last resort. We use strike action when we have no other choice. And I know, and our union knows, that if it wasn't for the strike action that we and our members were able to take over the last 2 years, alongside other trade unions, last year we wouldn't, for the first time in 30 years, have had a doubling of the Treasury pay remit that was awarded to our members. And let's be frank, it wasn't the benevolence of Rachel Reeves that gave us the 5% Treasury remit this year. It was a commitment to try and buy industrial peace, based on our ability to strike previously. So comrades, we fully support POA. We always have and we always will. Good comrades like Steve, and personal friendship to Steve, and support he's given to me since I became National President. And I know that every single person in this room, but also many that can't be here today, can't wait to be back in this room or one like it in the not too distant future, celebrating, raising those glasses to the restoration of trade union rights for the POA and those members who so desperately deserve and need them. Solidarity, comrades. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thanks very much. I want to dispel a couple of myths before we start. I'm not Steve Gillen's brother, but I am Mark. In the West London in the Ealing Trades Council, we had prison officers from Wormwood Scrubs, and they used to educate us, the rest of us trade unionists. Some of us might be a bit liberal, some of us might be a bit lefty, but they educated us to the reality of what the criminal justice system is, and how underfunding and how the degradation of the estate, the degradation of the facilities, and the degradation of the staff and the prisoners, the inmates, leads to more problems for working class people in working class areas. So justice is a class issue as far as I'm concerned. It suits the ruling class to bang more and more working class people up, many of whom have got profound mental health problems, many of them have got profound drug problems, and expect our prison officers, who, as we've heard, are dedicated to their job, to just deal with all those societal problems without the proper support, without the proper facilities, and without the political care that needs to go into this system, is a disgrace. Now, I'm glad there's Labour Party activists and MPs and Lords and whatever in the room, because I'm certain that Labour will do the right thing. If we were against these measures in opposition when they took our human rights away, took our civil rights away, took our right to strike off us, then we should be against it when we achieve power. And now it's up to the Labour Party to do the right thing, to make sure that our prison officers have the ability to collectively bargain freely, to negotiate freely, and to withdraw their labour as a last resort if they need to do that in their own interests, but also in the interests of the service. Because what we've seen over the last 3 years is that the people that are defending our public services are often the trade union members that have been forced to take strike action. Public sector workers have been ignored for far too long. That has to change under Labour, and we call on all Labour Party members, all Labour Party MPs, all Labour Party ministers to do the right thing by the POA, restore their rights and look after working people at their workplace. So good luck to the POA. I know you're going to see it through. We've seen the public ownership of the railways. We've got the Employment Rights Act. Let's get the third one of those three in a hat-trick and give the POA their rights. Good luck to all of you and solidarity.
Much of our work consists of employment tribunal claims, unfair dismissal, constructive dismissal, but much of it, too much of it, is dealing with the consequences of POA members working in one of the least safe workplaces in Western Europe. Dealing with the underfunding and overcrowding in prisons, which is such a blot on our society. We deal with huge numbers of cases for members who have been injured in the epidemic of violent assaults, too frequently facing life-changing, career-ending assaults. As you know, the POA is seeking a Royal Commission on prisons and the wider criminal justice system, as was promised but never delivered by the previous government. And we support the POA in that. And we know that every day the union does all it can to look after its members facing these challenges, and we stand with you in that. But we recognise too that the POA has a disadvantage when compared to almost all other unionised workplaces. As we know, this is why we're here this evening, its officer members cannot take industrial action due to the operations of Section 127. And when it's alleged that members have taken the action, some of my colleagues know only too well the kind of telephone call they will swiftly receive from the government legal department. We know those phone calls have developed into legal processes. Sometimes we can see these off in their early stages, but it has ended in fines for the union and threats to senior officials with even worse. So what can we do as lawyers to assist the POA in this campaign? So at present, one of the actions we're taking is the case in the European Court of Human Rights. And in that case, we are seeking a determination from the court on whether the pay review body operates as an effective compensatory mechanism in the circumstances where the POA and its members, only in England and Wales of course, have had their Article 11 rights infringed by being unable to take industrial action. So to put it bluntly, does the pay review body make up for being unable to strike? And specifically, does it do so given the government's ability to set the review body's terms of reference? And of course in December 2020 that included mandating that it could not consider recommendations inconsistent with the Chancellor's policy on public service pay, so clearly setting that agenda. And also, of course, the government's ability to reject the pay review body's recommendations in exceptional circumstances without adequate explanation, negotiation or challenge. So if we're successful in Strasbourg, the primary remedy is a declaration that the ban on industrial action violates Article 11 because the compensatory mechanisms are inadequate. Now, that would be a very difficult outcome for the government. We have heard, indeed we welcome the commitments to human rights and the strengthening of workers' rights which have come from our Labour government. At Thompson's we've surprised absolutely nobody by welcoming very strongly the new Labour government. But now we're at the stage where the court has invited the POA and the new government to resolve matters amicably. We know directly that we are still waiting to hear. So we really hope that the government takes the opportunity to reach a sensible and a workable outcome here. It cannot be right that as a nation we ask you not only to work with some of the most dangerous and vulnerable people in our society, but that we require you to do so without the basic human right of being able to withdraw your labour when you cannot resolve disagreements with your employer. So we stand with you in the campaign and we will do all we can to reach the right outcome.
They wrote to this government in July, after the result of the general election. We're heading towards Christmas. We've agreed one extension so the government can respond, and still we await an invitation to sit down with this Labour government and sort this issue out. So to the Labour MPs in the room, can you take it back to Sir Keir and get it sorted? Where's our invite? Because I'll tell you something now, if a prisoner waited that long for a complaint to be responded to, we'd be in disciplined trouble. So why is it good enough for the Labour politicians? It's not. Get it sorted. In opposition, I never met a Labour MP who didn't agree that we should have our trade union rights restored. Now they're in power, it's time for them to deliver for us. No excuses. You can't even make an excuse that it's going to cost the taxpayer, because it's not going to cost the taxpayer a penny. Restoring our trade union rights is free of charge. You can't say that very much in London. We've been under a permanent High Court injunction since 2017, which stops me even saying to my members, refuse to work overtime, work to rule, stop volunteering for tasks that you don't get paid for. I can't even say that to them. And when it comes to pay, like many trade union leaders in this room, when you get a derisory pay offer, you ballot your members and you go on strike and you fight and you win and you get decent pay awards. I can't even do that. We last walked out in 2018. In 2018, violence against staff was running at 30 a day. I was fed up with my members getting used as punch bags with no protections in place, and we walked them out. And me and Self and Steve, we got threatened with imprisonment. Which, as I've said before, that's great. Bring it on. But who's going to bang me up? All my members are outside on strike. So do your worst. We got fined over £210,000 for backing two branches who dared to walk to the gate to protect the health and safety of their members.
Shame.
How dare you? They did the right thing, and we will never repudiate any action anybody takes.
And see, before I call the next speaker, there was a common theme throughout what Mark just said there. In many respects, if you look at the actions that we've taken over the years, it's not actually been about pay. It's not been about us wanting more money. It's actually about safety. And when the injunction came in 1994 through Michael Howard, who was the then Home Secretary, it was because Preston had locked out because of overcrowding. That was the reality. And ever since then, that has been the reality. The force used against our members, getting battered day in, day out, and us daring to step up and say, no more. So Mark's absolutely right. And we will continue, even if it takes another 30 years, to continue with our campaign.
I am incredibly proud to be, I believe, only the second prison officer elected to Parliament, and I think the first POA committee chair, so it's really fantastic to be here. I think what's so special about the POA union, and that's no disrespect to the unions that compete, is that every single NEC member, every single branch official and chair, they're all from the shop floor. Everyone knows what it means to work in these prisons and the other establishments that we represent. And I think that's why our membership is so high. I think that's why we're so driven. And I think that's why, for a small union, we're an incredibly successful unit, and long may that continue. I want to also put on record my thanks to the POA NEC and to Steve and Mark for the personal support that you've given me leading up to the general election. I was a candidate for 2 years, and then also since the election, because I honestly can say, without the support of my colleagues at Moreland, POA members there and the POA NEC, my journey here would have been a lot more difficult. And I want to recognise you all for that, because it's important that the operational voice is in our Parliament, and you've helped me make that happen, so thank you very much. Prison officers continue to work in incredibly challenging jobs in increasingly difficult circumstances, and for too long in our political system the operational voice of prison officers has not been heard. And I'm determined that through my election here and also as my appointment as the PPS to the Justice Ministerial team, that will change. And I am even more certain of that now. It will not surprise you to hear that we have a Labour government with a ministerial team, and we've got some here tonight. We've got Nick Dakin, who's a Minister for Youth Justice, and also Lord Timpson, who's the new Minister for Prisons and Probation. And this is a serious team that are determined to bring change and improve outcomes in prisoners, which will ultimately benefit our members and prison officers and staff up and down the country. And you all here as POA members are absolutely integral to that. because you're the voice of the shop floor, and it's imperative that not just you people here, but everyone across the country is making sure that politicians like myself now, and also the Labour government, know how decisions that are made here are impacting our prisons across the country. And I have no doubt that Steve and Mark will be holding our feet to the fire in the coming years, and we thank you for that. So I just sort of want to say thank you for being here today. I look forward to working with you all in a very different role to what I have done in the past 6 years from this side of things, but still with the same aim of improving our prisons, improving working conditions for prison officers, and making sure that the Labour government delivers the change that we desperately need across the criminal justice system. So thank you.
Thank you to the POA for incredible friendship and support you've always shown to me in the good days and the more difficult days. All days are interesting. I want to also thank the POA for the work it does in representing the members in prisons and the way you speak out about the appalling conditions that are in many of our prisons, and the way that leads to violence, leads to overcrowding, leads to criminalisation of prisoners, and turns them into not the places they ought to be, which is one of reform and rehabilitation and reintegration into society, into something much worse. And I think that the work of the POA in challenging the underfunding of the prison system is very, very important, and I thank you for all the work you've done on that. Fundamentally, the right to strike is something that's there in the ILO Convention, first signed in 1921. And it is also there in international human rights legislation. It's absolutely clear right to withdraw your labour collectively if you're in dispute with your employer. And that's exactly what the POA demands. So it's simply not fair and not right that prison officers are denied the right to strike. And actually, a more powerful union with that right to strike means that it can negotiate from a stronger position with the employer. It also means that actually the places are better run and better managed. If you look across British industry, look across all industries where there's a strong union, you find better management, higher rates of productivity, and a much more satisfied workforce. I have one prison in my borough left, that's Pentonville. We used to have HMP Holloway as well, and I've often talked to many of the prison officers, particularly in Holloway when it was open, so I went there quite often to talk to them. And I thought, what fantastic people, very dedicated to their jobs, very, very supportive of the prisoners. But they would say things to me like, Jeremy, what are we supposed to do? We want our prisoners to get education, but every time there's a staff shortage, every time something else comes up, the first thing that gets cut is education. We're here because we want to see prisoners change and improve their lives, but we're not given the resources to achieve that, we're not given the opportunity to achieve that, and that's what we want to do. So I want to say a big thank you to the Prison Officers Association for the work you've done, the support you give to everybody else, and I'm absolutely with you on getting the right to strike, just like every other worker in every other industry should have and must have, and we'll support you to make sure we win that. Thank
you. I'm sure I saw Andy Slaughter in the room, who's just been. Hi Andy, if you're more than welcome to say a few words, Andy. I don't want to put you on the spot. Andy has just become chair of the Justice Select Committee, but we've known Andy for a long time. Andy has been involved in POA campaigns before. Andy, you don't have to speak on that particular issue, although it's dear to our heart, but moreover, the Justice Select Committee and the importance of that Justice Select Committee, where we give vital evidence to the Justice Select Committee over the years. And you do listen to us from time to time. No, seriously, you do listen to us. So, Andy, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really pleased to have been elected chair of it, having done 10 years, well, more than 10 years, 20 years here, but 10 years shadow on the Justice Committee, a member as a shadow minister, shadow Solicitor General, criticising the previous government and trying to hold their feet to the fire. And now I'll be able to do it all over again, but with a Labour government. I'm slightly grieving for the fact that for the first time in 20 years I don't have the scrubs in my constituency. in the many times that when I went into the scrubs, I always made sure I said, can you include the slot where I see the POA? I want to find out what is actually happening here as best I can. And I have had a very close working relationship over that time. I do admire absolutely what every single prison officer in this country does at the best of times, and these are not the best of times. And I have great confidence in the ministerial team, as others have said, in Lord Timpson and Nick and in the Lord Chancellor and in others. But it's not going to be an easy job because we are in such a terrible situation. And I think, you know, even Michael Howard would probably admit that prison isn't working at the moment for a lot of people because of the condition of the state that sits in it. We all have to work together to ensure that improves. But I know the people who bear the brunt of the pain and anguish of that are the people in this room, people you represent around the country in the scrubs and every other prison. And that is always at the front of my mind. So whatever else we get distracted onto on the select committee, you can rest assured that we will be holding up the integrity of the POA, the rights of prison officers, and ensuring that they get a fair deal out of this government, which they didn't get out of the last.
Yeah. Thank you.